I set this up quite a while ago, and as you can see, it goes through lots of changes, and like walking through a crowd of people, some people stay, some people move, and it's quite important that it has that kind of slightly transient quality, where we see people every day walking through the crowd, and we lose some, we leave some. The underneath painting, this painting will probably end up almost black and white, but the underneath of the painting has a kind of coloured life, which is very important. It's not just sort of black and white. There's a kind of, if you like, a sort of blood underneath the painting. I find the most difficult thing in painting is trying to stop yourself having a fixed notion of what the end result would be, because if it doesn't surprise you at the end of the day, then it's probably not that interesting, to be honest.
I'm Mr. Small and the world is getting larger. Mr. Dizzy on the black run, well I swear that they are harder. Oh, say it like you mean it. La 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 la. Doctor, will you do more than Doctor do little? A procedure it seems that no one did tackle. So would you get a tickle? It's my brain.
I read a thing by Logie Baird the other day, and he said, when he was first doing his experiments with television, and he said, I can see a few shadows coming through. And actually sometimes the painting process is a little bit like that when I begin a painting, there are sort of certain glimmers of things that come through in the painting, which the problem then is how to realise those and make them clear for the onlooker, so to speak.
It's my brain. It's got a mind of its own and it's clear that it's prone to being quite savage. I've come for a partial lobotomy. Just leave me the heart of the cabbage. It's the brain.
Does it get cold in here?
It gets freezing, so actually a lot of the winter I try and prepare so that now when the weather's getting better, I've got a kind of a sort of book of ideas so that I can just come down and start without having to. Could I move from one subject to another subject quite quickly? I sort of I shouldn't say this, but I sort of lose interest in some of the things that I've done in the past because I get too excited about what I'm trying to do in the future, People, well, I mustn't make generalisations like this, but we've kind of, as a society, we've lost the ability to talk to people with opposing views without getting upset, and actually argument and discussion of what civilization is made of, and you don't have to agree with somebody in order to have a dialogue with them, and that seems to have broken down completely. I talk to everyone pretty much on the street here, as people do in St Leonards. But the only trouble is, I find when I go up to London these days, I'm still smiling at people and they're looking at me like, who's that lunatic, Sort of riot. And they are really just sketches, just ideas of tear gas, eye in the sky. And then sometimes they are really literally just scribbles of little figure ideas. Picture of our dog. That's a study I showed you the painting sort of that downstairs, but that was a sort of primary thing where I wasn't even quite sure at the time what it was going to be, But it was one that I quite liked, so I then went on and the best things are things which I kind of always felt as if they were already there. Whenever I try and invent something, it's never quite as interesting as the things that just sort of arrive, is it?
If you've got an imagination,
yeah,
then you're looking around and some of what you're thinking is positive, some of it's negative,
yeah.
But it's all interesting.
Yeah. And that, in a way, interesting is a word which is often not used because it's often used as a sort of slight term of abuse in a funny sort of way. That's interesting because you can't say I love it or I hate it.
Yeah.
So you say, well, that's interesting, but actually it's probably one of the better forms of flattery, actually, to be honest.
Are you ever satisfied with anything that you've done?
No. I'm not really looking for perfection in a painting. It's more about a kind of meaning, not necessarily a kind of a meaning that you could write down, but trying to find that meaning. And perfection is not something that I'm that interested in, because it seems to be a most unrealistic concept. I mean, I have to say, I'm probably only because of Joe that I have even my own paintings in my living area, because I find them, not in a bad way, but I find them at times quite annoying, because you always think how I could have done that better or differently. And so the idea of staring at them all evening is sort of kind of, when I finish work, it sort of just means that I'm continuing to work, because I'm keeping on thinking, I could do that better. And as you can see, I haven't really got many of my paintings around here.
I'm often rather envious of cats and dogs and foxes. They are never anything other than themselves. There's snakes and pelicans and all the kingsmen's horses. Animals, you know they don't do show and tell.
The best paintings are things which you sort of see new things in every time you look at them, in a way, so they don't get stuck, and so that you can sort of see there's a sort of slight level of ambiguity. It doesn't have to be obvious, where suddenly you sort of realise something that you hadn't seen before, which that keeps the painting alive. You know, if you sort of look at a painting after 2 weeks, you've understood it all, then it's probably not so interesting.
Pretending to be a person, I think I got away with it today.
What stage did you find your interest in art?
About 7 or 8.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, I've never wanted to do anything else really, and I was always sort of drawing and bird watching and drawing the birds.
Was it quite solitary for you? Did you just you sat there with your crayons or whatever, you know?
And you know, I mean, my grandparents were aghast, and I said that I wanted to sort of actually be an artist, you know, because they wanted me to go to university and be not like them in a way. So yes, it was always quite sort of solitary, but not in a sort of gloomy sort of way. It was just sort of kind of, I was, you know, also bearing in mind that my grandparents were sort of old when I grew up with, you know, and so instead of having sort of a dad that could go out and play football with you or something, they couldn't. You know, my grandfather was sort of had a bad emphysema. He would just sit by the fire all day long, and my gran was always sort of washing and sort of kind of cooking, and they were very sort of Victorian strict as well. You know, they were proper sort of.
Between the last breath and extinction, where the death of the attention span is everywhere.
And so, you know, in a way, when I go into Camberwell, that was just quite a big shock to me, except that by that time I'd already met quite a lot of artists by just being rude and nosy, and so kind of, you know, people like you and Nuclear and stuff, you know, I'd been out to drinks with them, and so kind of all the people that were sort of then, you know, not necessarily big, but there was Kossoff was about, Leon Kossoff was about, and Frank Bowling, you know, all those sort of people. And so it was quite a sort of revelation from me being, because I was really, it was a sort of a country boy really, because Hitchin was a small market town. No one had it, hardly anyone had real paintings on their wall. My grandparents had 2 alpine scenes of Griesbach, where their family came from, sort of tinted photographs, and that was it. And books, nothing. You know, the Radio Times was the nearest I got to sort of literature at that point. And then of course when I started to get to about sort of 13 or 14, I started sort of reading, you know, discovering reading, and sort of tried to read all the Russians and the French, and you know, and then I got kicked out of school for not.
Well, I think it's badge of honour, isn't it?
Exactly. And so that was actually quite good, because then I was able to sort of go off and you know, I went to the College of Further Education, did art, and then got into art school from there, you know. And then actually when I finished art school, you know, I got invited back to teach at the art school. And I was one of the youngest people teaching there at that point, which was quite, but then the whole art school got dismantled a few years later.
Which art school was that?
Camberwell School of Art. And then when that all dismantled, I sort of, I was still teaching there, but I went to America and I stayed in America for maybe, 14 years.
Wow.
I lived in New York for 14 years.
You and I, constructed by the most aloof and devious intention, we separate, divide and war, and recognize not a single thing we see. Well, I do not yearn for the most.
And you managed to come away with that accent and everything.
Yeah, I tried very hard. But it was great because New York was completely bonkers at that time. People.
What was it? This the 80s or?
Yeah, sort of kind of mid-80s, when everything in the art world was going nuts. People were making huge amounts of money. It was a good atmosphere actually in New York at that time because everyone was very accessible. You know, I could go into the local bar around the corner from my studio and Jeff Koons would be standing there and Warhol, you'd see Warhol in Studio 54 or one of those places. And all those, Quentin Crisp, because Quentin Crisp, I had done a lot of drawings when I was on my foundation course in St Albans before I went to Camberwell. Quentin Crisp was a model there on quite a permanent basis. He was there sort of, you know, and I made a lot of drawings of Quentin Crisp. And when I saw him once, I didn't even realise he'd moved to America. And I saw him and he went, "Hello, Matthew." And then went, you know, because it was sort of unlikely, sort of kind of.
Have you still got some drawings that you did?
Yeah, actually, they're all at my father's house now.
Were you able to survive financially in America?
Yeah, I mean, I was probably at my most prosperous in America, actually. I was very lucky that I was able to sell my work, sold very well. I've got a big show in Chicago next year in a really good sort of museum art centre in, I think it's March, I'm not sure quite, drawings, which is hopefully will be quite good. So that'll be quite interesting to see, you know, how much I've been forgotten.
Has your work changed a lot, do you think, over the years?
I probably think it's changed more than it actually has, because you have, you know, however fresh you think you're being, you have kind of sort of physical habits that you can't avoid in a funny sort of way. However much you try and undermine them at times to try and, you know, there's a kind of there's a sort of autographic quality to painting, really, I think, that is, you know, and that's one of the things that makes it so valuable at the moment, I think, because with the kind of mechanisation of imagery, which is gradually becoming more and more, that kind of autographic quality is that it couldn't have been done without you at that particular moment in time, and without those materials is sort of a kind of important sort of factor, really.
Although with AI these days, maybe it could.
Well, yes, it probably could, you know. But I think the fear of, a lot of artists are quite fearful of AI, but actually my feeling is like, you know, when photography started, people were going around saying that's the end of painting. And in fact, it was the blossoming of painting, because the Impressionists just went and stole everything out of photography and used it in their paintings, and they were, you know, that's one of the most important times in contemporary painting, the beginning of, I think that kind of is one of the difficult things that I think a lot of younger artists have had, is that terrible fear that you're not original. When you start off, you know, you look around at the models that are around you, the people that you admire, and you try and sort of see what they did, sort of go from there.
Do you have any feel for like other forms of art? You know, you showed me those sort of three-dimensional bits down. I know you were just playing with those, and it wasn't a big serious attempt to do something. But are you drawn to doing more of that?
Yes, I think actually if I ever got into a sort of financial situation where I could do it myself without having to go to people and saying, how can we fabricate this? And that is the difficult thing with those sort of things, is that, and also I'm a little bit nervous with three-dimensional things, because it's not stepping out into the real world is sort of I find it slightly difficult, because with a painting you go in through the surface of the painting, don't you? And everything happens inside the painting. Whereas when you start making three-dimensional objects, it starts occupying the real world. You know? And I think that's probably because I haven't done very much of it that I find.
But are there other areas that you'd like to get involved in?
Well, I've always really wanted to sort of, I know it might sound ridiculous, but I've always really wanted to sort of kind of paint landscapes, not in a traditional way, but, and you know, I was always quite a keen gardener, and I love birds and animals, and I'd always wanted to make that. Whenever I try to do it, I always think that the real thing is better than the painting, so I don't bother. Whereas actually, if I make things about the human sort of condition, I can sort of say something about it. Whereas if I paint a picture of a beautiful flower, what the flower's saying it already, so I find it a bit tricky, because I know that my attempt will be seriously inferior to the real thing. Does that make sense?
It does. With your, you know, when you're commenting on the human condition, then you've got your strong emotions feeding you with that, and there is no wrong way to do that.
No, yeah. Do you make a comfortable painting with two motorways running across it, sort of kind of thing? You know, there's all of those sort of elements to it which have made it. It's not just a question of just going out and painting a cornfield. It's how do you imply those other things that are lurking in the background but are not visible. You know, I would think it's a bit like painting, you know, artists painted battles, you know, Rubens painted great big battle scenes. Now, if you were going to paint a warfare scene, you'd paint someone in a white coat pressing a button. And so there's no actually, you know...
The atmosphere's lost, you mean? Really?
Yeah, and all the writhing horses and the swords and everything. And I think often the things that sort of good art show things that are so obvious that you don't see them. And that's, anyway, I think a lot of good artists, their function is to sort of wake us all up to things that are so there that we can't see them, you know, wood for the trees and all that sort of stuff, you know. But I think that's quite important.
Oh, silence faded. If not now, when I get lost in the noise, amusements of men into corners where painted.
I always kind of, I think I will always have a sort of slight ambivalence about results of things that I make, because actually, in the end, you know that even a painting might last 500 years, but actually, in the big scheme of things, it's, you know, nothing really, is it? You know, there's a sort of fallibility, you know, where and you sort of, whatever you do, you know, and in fact, actually, you quite often find that people, I've found that actually, often people that are very, very good at things, you know, not necessarily artists, but tend to be more self-effacing than some of the people that aren't quite so good at them, that are trying to become good at them. And they tend to be the more generous, the more, you know, I don't like making generalisations, but I found that to be quite often the case, you know.
How long ago did you move to St Leonards?
7 years.
What was the reason behind it?
I think it actually had a lot to do with quality of life. Is that London had become so stressful, and expensive obviously, but stressful and not very. I found it less and less, when I first went to live in London, I found it very inspiring creatively. But there was a sort of element of it that that seemed to have sort of evaporated a little bit. and that there seemed to be so many other priorities in a big city like that. People had so many other priorities that somehow, and also I do, you know, even just having a few flower pots and things like that, I do find satisfaction in those sort of things. And also because it was just a town that seemed to be filled with sort of incredibly eccentric people. But also
walking down the King's Road in St Leonards can be very interesting.
Exactly, and also I think one of the most age homogenous society. You know, if you go to Green Man Festival, you get 3-year-old kids dancing with 80-year-old people, and no one bats an eyelid. You know, and actually London had become very sort of age conscious. So some pubs you go to, and it's all sort of 20 to 30 years old. Others is an old pub, and there's not much sort of age integration in London.
Interesting view, that. Yeah. If you're not going to talk to them, what is the point?
Well, yeah. And I think that is a sort of, I think there is a sort of a slight crisis about to happen there, because I think, you know, once that dialogue that we talked about earlier between people breaks down, the chances of problem solving become restricted, basically.
How are you feeling about what you're doing and where you are? And that means, that's a sort of generalised geographical as well as a sort of intellectual question. I
think Degas had the perfect answer to that, because he said painting is easy when you don't know how, and very difficult when you do. You know? And that, I think, does sum it up, because it gets more difficult, partly because your horizons, it's one of those things that the nearer you get to the horizon, the faster it moves away from you. You know, and I think that's sort of true. And if you find yourself on the horizon, if you're looking at that horizon, you find yourself arrived there, then nowhere else to sort of go from there.
There's space music coming up in a minute, you know, to give you that kind of travelling through space feel. Ooh, here it comes. Beam me up, Scotty. Now I'm floating high and dry, buoyed up above the clouds. These dreams are just the ticket to avoid the earthly crowds. I'll travel round the universe, telling all I find, singing the blues as I warn them of our kind, because we're mad and bad, we humans. We're not good for the universe at all, really, are we? I don't think so. I think I should tell you again why we're not good for the whole of the universe. So, look at all the strangers flying overhead. They've taken all their fantasies and tied them to my bed. There's a woman wearing water wings regarding me with fear. She doesn't really need to. I said I'm answer here. Now I'm floating high and dry, going up above the clouds. The dreams are just a ticket to avoid the earthly crowds. Yeah, I'm out of here. That's me gone. Thank you.